Hi, I'm Nate from Lovells Adelaide. Now in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to install an Airbag Man airbags into this 200 series. Now this is a 2014 200 series, so it is the earlier model. However, they are the same airbag and the same part number. The suspension hasn't changed across the board. The two airbags here. Now this is a ute version or a leaf sprung vehicle. So obviously you get coil utes, but a leaf sprung vehicle, they will use an airbag like so, depending on what vehicle and to what size lift is to what size airbag. And then obviously the coil sprung, so these go inside your coils. So there's the two airbags. I love fitting these airbags. They're a fantastic airbag. They're designed with the valves and how the hoses click in. Fantastic, very rarely ever leak, and when they do, it's only purely from user error and hasn't been cut properly. So they're a very long lasting airbag, especially with these Kevlar high pressure sleeves. You'll never have any issues, you'll outlast the life of the vehicle. All right, so inside their box and the kit that you'll buy, obviously this is a HP kit, so a high pressure kit. Comes with some high pressure sleeves. They obviously go around the bag. Airbags, vital important piece for this kit. Two of them, spacers. These protect the valves at the top once it's in the vehicle. Some airbag line. So this goes from the airbags across to where we put the valves. That's what you use to pump them up. And then lastly, inside this little bag, it's all the bits and pieces, the little fittings, the valves itself. There's the user manuals, what pressures, the maximum pressures, everything you need to know, product manuals. And then I've got the stickers there for the vehicle, just so that the customer knows what's actually been put in. So that is everything you need to install a set of airbags into your vehicle. With the high pressure sleeves, they can take up to 60 PSI. So it is a very strong airbag. Some of these other ones on the market obviously don't use the airbag, these sleeves. Now they're a Kevlar sleeve, so they're a very strong sleeve. So this is going to protect you from any stones, dirt, sticks, anything coming under the vehicle up through the base of it. Obviously you want to protect that airbag as best as you can. So a Kevlar sleeve, one of the best ways you can actually do that. Airbags themselves, what they're doing is if you want to maintain comfort on your ride, it helps assist the spring just to carry that load. So on a standard suspension, you put a caravan thing on, it sinks right down and sags. That way, the back's going down, the front of the vehicle's coming up. You're actually taking weight off the steering wheels and it makes it hard to steer. So with a set of airbags, pump them back up, it then pushes that weight from the rear wheels back across the front wheels and it gives you good steering, makes it a lot safer to drive on the road. So with the airline itself, cutting the airline to the correct length for both sides of the vehicle. So obviously they give you one big roll of it and we've got to cut it in half and use it for both airbags. Now it does say in the instructions, so if you read them, it is in there. What they say not to do, if you get side cutters and you just cut a piece here, let me show you. You can see that it's not round, if the camera is going to focus on it. It's actually not round, it's more of an oval shape. Now that is not going to seal up in the airbag and you're going to have a lot of leaks from there on in. So what they actually say in the instructions is, Airbag Man, you can get these if you need them. They're cutters, because I'm doing these all the time. We've bought a set. That is a very clean cut right there. Now that is a perfectly round cut and that is going to seal up and be a good joint in the airbag. So the other way you can do it at home is with a sharp knife or a Stanley blade and gently cut through it. But basically you don't actually want to crush the hose as you're cutting it. It needs to be a nice clean cut to seal up in the airbag. With the airline here, obviously I'm just going to wrap it around something or other and pull it back. And then this way I can find the halfway point and get the same length for both sides of the vehicle. So with the conduit on the outside of it, it's actually really easy to pull the tube through it and then it's not right. So if you just split the tube out of it, grab both ends of it, you can pull it tight. That way you'll then find the middle. And then you can cut it in the middle and that way you've got the same length on both sides of the vehicle. Now this also depends on where you're going to install the valves. If the valves are going onto one particular side of the vehicle, what's required is the opposite side airbag needs to be longer. So you'll do a rough measurement, pull it out and then cut it. And then the other side will be a lot shorter, but that's what's required to get both airbags out of the same hose. All right, so you can see I've got one airbag with the Kevlar coat, with the high pressure sleeve already on it. I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, I'm going to cheat because I do this so often. I've got a little piece of line with the valve closed off on side of it. This way you can push the air out, push it in, and it's a lot easier to use. The kit does come with a little red plug. You can push the air out of the bag, push this in. It just makes it a lot easier to get that sleeve on. So I'll show you how I do it. I find a lot easier in that rubber plug. There it is there. So once that's in, obviously it can't suck air back in, so it's going to stay in that shape. Now if you then just twist it slightly, it reduces the size of it, and then you can just push it straight in. Now OCD, depending on how OCD you are, Airbag man, if you want that label the right way, it does matter. Airbag valve has to be at the top. So you can put it in both ways. It doesn't make a difference. It's just if you want it cosmetically to look nice with the label the right way, the valve has to be at the top. So very easy to actually install the airbag into the sleeve as soon as you do that. Now to remove it, the actual valve itself, you need to push down on the outer ring, and that will enable the hose to come out. Sucks the air back in. There it is, that's installed. I've already removed the rear shocks of this just to allow the rear axle to hang. That's going to then allow me to remove the rear springs. Now what you notice on the rear spring, it's a factory bump stop. Now this is the other component you need to reuse. This is to stop the spring actually touching metal on metal and squeaking, and it allows the bump stop. Now with the airbags, essentially they become the new bump stop. So I'm going to get a hacksaw, cut the bump stop off. So the dirt and mud that's in here, once it's in the vehicle, there is access into it through a little hole in the chassis on this, like the spring plate. So they put this little hole in through the bump stop. That way the moisture can actually run out of it, and it's not going to sit there. If this sits here full of moisture and mud and dirt, it's just going to rust at that spring plate really quickly. So they need a drain hole, drain the moisture out of it, and that way it can turn to dirt and dust, and then it's just going to fall through the hole. But that way it's not actually going to rust out the spring plate. Sometimes you will need a pry bar just to get in under that spring, pull it down, just to release it, and then from there it will come out. So there's the same bump stop. So I'm going to go cut both of these and get them both done now. So here we are with our bench vise. So if I just do that up tight on this edge bit, that way it's going to hold it nicely, and then with the hacksaw I can then get a good grip on it and cut it straight off. So with the bump stop itself, it is only that middle section actually holding. That way it allows it to flex a little bit, depending on what articulation the vehicle's on, as to where it needs to hit. So rubbish, we don't need that. That's now gone, and the airbags will effectively become the actual bump stop on this vehicle. That hole in the middle, if I turn this around, you can actually see in the bump stop itself, the plastic's quite smaller than the actual hole. So we need to take that plastic out to the same size as this rubber outer. So I've got a step drill bit, and and there it is. So that's about the size of the hole that you need to do. It's not much, you just need to make that a little bit bigger. That way the hose, the airline and the conduit can run through it and not get caught. So if it's too small and the conduit gets caught in there, it's just going to kink it over. Now as soon as you get a kink in the line, you can't get air through either way. So either with the compressor when you're pumping it up, it might be able to force the air through it, but you won't be able to deflate that bag. We have had some issues where it's got caught not in here, but in another part where the airline has been kinked. So you have to be very careful when you're running the airlines that it's not going to get kinked on anything or get caught, because we can have air pressure going into one side of it, but not allowing it to come back out to deflate. On here you can see where I've cut is not quite flat. Now it doesn't have to be, that's the idea of the spacer. It will just sit on there nicely. I don't like doing that. I'm going to shove it on the belt sander, just sand that down flat, and that way it's just going to look neat. It's just for my OCD and personal preference for the customer. So there we go, you can see the very outside ring where it is, but that is almost a perfectly smooth bump stop. So now we've got airbags and the springs. So this customer here, he's getting a lift and gets some new springs. So obviously here's the springs. Now installing them into the airbags into the springs, it's a really tight fit. You can either force it through this way, but once again, squish it down and you can give it that slight twist and it just pushes straight in. So once it's in, obviously you can see it's twisted there. It's a bit warped, but you just got to just manipulate the bag around, pull the Kevlar coating. Obviously you don't want that bag exposed at all. So it has to be coated with that Kevlar high pressure sleeve. So once it's in there, it's just a bit of manual work, just twisting it. Sometimes push the air out and then you can pull the bag back down. With positioning, you want it roughly in the middle of the spring. So at the top, spacer goes back in, and then the bump stop itself, and then in the bottom of it, up on the diff housing, there's a little spacer where it actually sits in here. And then once the weight of the vehicle's in, it's going to push the bag up or down slightly depending on where it needs to go. But you don't want to have it right at the top because bump stop won't fit in then. So you can see there, the bump stop actually comes into there. And then with the spacer, that's almost the perfect spot. So it doesn't quite fit, just push the bag down a little bit, but it's roughly in the middle of the spring where you're wanting it. So there's that one. I'll just get this second one done. There we go. Once again, roughly in the middle of the spring, and that will just allow it, once it's in the vehicle, you can move slightly up and down. There's the line, plug that in, and then you can feed the spacer on. Now the spacer here, you can see the chamfer on the inside. That chamfer must be face down on the valve. That's the part that protects the valve. So we can put that on, and then the bump stop. Feed it all down and it will sit there. So that's one way of doing it. Obviously it takes a bit longer to feed the hose through it. The other way, find the end, is if you know the reverse order, you can feed the hose through the bump stop, through the spacer, and then from there, straight into the airbag. So I don't know if you'd hear, there's a little click as you hear it go in. That's how you know the airline's installed correctly. And then from there, the spacer goes in, and then the bump stop goes on top. So that's the easy way to do it, but you can do it two ways. Makes no difference as long as you've got the airbag, the spacer, and then the bump stop. So once you've got all of that installed, the next part is installing it into the vehicle. So on this 200, in their spring seat, there's a hole for that airline. So this will come straight through there, and then we'll feed it along the chassis and put the spring in. What I'm doing is, through the spring seat from where the bump stop sits, I'm just routing the airline up along the chassis. There you can see it's gone through the spring seat and it's come back out past the chassis. So if I grab the airbag now, it's just a matter of pulling them both up at the same time. And that will sit there. So that's the first one in. I'll get the next one in. And then we can actually lift the housing back up and bolt the shocks back on to hold the springs in there. So once you put your springs in, you can see the spring here, it's actually got the pigtail here. Now there's a locator in here, so you can put the spring in. You just need to make sure you twist it, and then from there it's locked in. It won't twist any further. That's quite important. That way, when you're actually on the road, the spring itself can't twist, and you're actually getting the full comfort right of the spring. You don't want it twisting. You would just want to be able to compress up and down. From there, routing the airline. So you need to know where the valves are going. Now in this instant, I'm going to be putting the valves up here in these little holes on the rear bar itself. So you need to know where the valves are going so you can run the airlines the right way. So with this vehicle here, along the chassis, I'm going to go above the cross member where the spare tire is. That way I can bring it around. I'm going to feed it across the cradle for the spare tire again. And then from there, there we are, feed it above the chassis and then pull it down. So it's always best to leave the excess here. That way, once you've got the valve in, you can cut it there, put it into the valve, and then you can pull it back slightly to cable tie out of the way. That way it just gives it a nice neat finish and gives you a good length. So we'll get this other side done. Once they are routed and you're happy with where it's routed, then we can go back through and cable tie it up. Pretty much you can just cable tie it to anything secure that's not moving, and making sure, obviously this side is an exhaust. You don't want it touching the exhaust. It's going to get hot and melt. So you want to cable tie up away from the exhaust and any moving components really. And then once again, up over the chassis. So depending on your specific vehicle and what accessories, how the back end is, you're just going to have to get creative, find anything that's strong and secure. It's away from hot and rotating components, and we can just cable tie it to that to secure it. There's no load going through it. It's not a heavy load. It just needs to be secured and fastened so it won't flap around in the breeze. You can't rub on objects, obviously rub through, because if it sits there rubbing, it can cut through the conduit and then it can wear into the actual hose itself. So as long as it's secure, it's not going to rub, it's not going to melt on any component, that's fine. Here we are. I've already cut the conduit off this side. This is all the excess we don't need. So if you work out roughly what length you need and give it a bit extra, then you can go through, cut it off. There it is there. Make sure you want to get a clean cut. Now, so you can see here, it is slightly oval. It wasn't quite in the center of the tool. So I'm going to just trim that off again. So up here. Now you want to make sure, if you've got a cutter, you want to make sure you get it square. If you're using a blade or a knife, just make sure you're cutting it square. From there, I've just grabbed the valve and feed that on, click it in. So that's another thing to be careful of with the conduit. You can see it's long, a bit long, and it actually touches. So with that conduit, it's actually going to push on the back of the valve, and it can actually just push the spring tension off, and you'll actually undo itself. So make sure the conduit's not that long. There's that, and then put a washer on the valve. And then with this one, where I'm mounting, it's a bit tricky to get into the back of it. There's another washer and then another nut. So with the valve itself, there's a hex section just there, so that's a 12mm spanner. And then put a washer on just to spread the load a bit. And if you drill the hole, if your vehicle, you need to drill a hole to mount it, it gives you a bit of clearance to actually drill a slightly bigger hole so you can fit the valve through, and a washer, and then obviously you sandwich it on the other side with another washer and then the nut. So it's going to sit like that in the vehicle with wherever. So if it's the rear bumper or whatever, it will sandwich itself in there tight, and you do the nut up. So that's how the valve sits. Every vehicle is slightly different as to where you're mounting it, but that's the essentials behind it. You don't need to go tight on it, you just need to go firm. They will lock up themselves. So don't go overboard. You can strip the nut off. It is quite easy to do. So there we have it. That's both valves installed. Both airlines ran into the bags themselves. So I'm going to grab the air compressor, pump these up, double check for any leaks, make sure there's no leaks. Now, this is the time, if there is a leak, fix it now. That way you haven't already put the shocks and everything back together. You've got to pull it all off again and start again. So I'll grab that. We do have a soapy solution. You can spray it across all the valves and fittings. Just double check for any leaks. So I'll grab the compressor, we'll pump it up and go from there. If your vehicle doesn't have a lift, you can still put airbags in them. They're just a smaller airbag. So Airbag Man make airbags for most, I won't say all, most vehicles. Obviously we need to check through the books, because every vehicle you can get slightly different bags depending on your vehicle with what lift you've got. If it is standard, you can get standard bags. These bags here, they're suited for a 2-inch lift or a 50mm lift. And there is a bigger bag you can go for a higher lift. Now obviously, it is illegal, you're doing the engineering, doing the higher lift, or if it's for off-road use only, you can do a bigger bag just to help carry weight. So, 40 PSI in both bags. If there is a leak, if it is a big one, you will hear the air gushing out. I can't hear any leaks. They're both holding pressure, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to take the pressure back out of them. And we'll leave it with there for now. That's the airbags now installed into the vehicle. I'll go ahead, just lift the rear axle back up and put the shocks back on, and we are now finished and completed with this job. So I've just got the trans jack, so we'll just lift this rear axle back up. Now the other thing you do need to be careful of, because the springs are loose in there, you do need to just hold them and line them up. And that will locate. So once that's located in, you just need to go high enough. There it is. So, and then grab the shock bolt, and that goes back on. So that's the first side. Just take this back off and go over to the other side. Depending on your particular vehicle, you may have to release a sway bar, just allow that rear axle to hang low enough to get the coils out. On this one here, this has got a KDSS, so it's a hydraulic sway bar. So you only need to release one side of it, because the hydraulic control unit is connected to the other side. That gets hooked up back on the ground. So finish that one off, it has to be on the ground. But your particular vehicle, if it's just a standard sway bar, you can hook the sway bar back up now, and then that's all done. There we have, that's the completion of airbags installed into a 200 series.
So now they're installed, what do we do with them? If you're a first-time airbag user, the first question people usually ask is, what pressure will I run? And the answer is, there's no fixed answer to that. In a standard everyday situation when you're unloaded, you still want the suspension soft, so you need to take the air out of the bags And the recommendation from Airbag Man is to run about 4 or 5 psi. That just gives the bag a bit of substance, a bit of shape. You would have seen in the earlier video, Nate was able to scrunch up the empty airbag. If you have that empty airbag in the spring, there's potential you can get caught, trapped, pinched, leak, all that kind of stuff. So Airbag Man recommend 4 or 5 psi just to give it some shape and structure in the spring itself, so it can't get pinched and so on. So now you've got your new airbags. What do you do with it? How much air pressure? So that really depends upon how much ball weight you've got, if that's the case, or how much weight you're putting into the back of the vehicle. Remember, the airbag is like a variable spring. You pump it up and it gets harder and harder, and it's just like putting in a harder steel spring in the car instead, except we can tune it for the conditions. What we recommend is always, it's a trial thing. You've got your caravan, it might have 200 kilo ball weight, put 20 psi in the bags and see how it goes. Remember, the thing with the airbag is we want to make the rear end of the car stiffer, so we take away the bounce that you get from the ball weight. You go over a set of speed humps, for example, you feel it, boom, 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 the weight of the caravan on the back of the car. Put more pressure in, firm up the rear suspension. You'll find there's a sweet spot where it takes away the bounce, or most of the bounce, so you're not rocking and rolling along the road. As I said, you might start with 20 psi, you're still getting rocking and rolling, put another 5 in, another 10 in. You'll find that there's a point where that feeling goes away, and then if you keep putting more in, the rear end of the car will actually get too firm, and then you also get the reverse where there's not enough give, and all of a sudden there's a shock and bouncing in the back of the car as well. Time to take a bit of air out and find that sweet spot where it works really well. My own situation of a camper trailer with about 150 or so kilo of ball weight, and I find 15 psi works really well. I have a boat with 250 odd kilos of ball weight, and I typically run that about 30 psi. And that doesn't change unless, of course, you're putting more stuff in the back of the car as well. So you'll find your spot, you know, I'm going to hook up the van, down to the servo, chuck in 30 psi, and then you're good to go each time. Or, you know, you're putting a 7x4 trailer in, you're probably not even going to have enough ball weight to even worry about putting air in the back. So it really is a case of try it. If it's still got a lot of bounce, put a bit more in. Try it again, a bit more in if you like. If it's too firm, you'll soon feel it, time to back it away. But once you know what those pressures are for that situation, you can just go straight there every time, and it's about right. In the example Nate just showed you, the vehicle is fitted with the manual valves just beside the tow bar. This is the other alternative here, where we actually use the onboard compressor and paddles to be able to control the pressures in the bags. We have a gauge showing us the left and right pressures. We have the paddles so we can inflate or decrease the pressure, and we have the air compressor on board so we can turn the air compressor on and off. So, as I said, coming back, you're about to hook up the van, you want 20 psi. In this particular case, just inflate it up to 20 odd psi. There we go. We put the van on, trim the pressure if we want, but it's as simple as that when you've got an onboard inflation system with the gauge. Beats going down to the servo and having to adjust it or get the compressor out of the box and plug it in. Then when you're done, let the pressure out. Probably can't see so much, but the car is actually going up and down a little bit as well. Because the bags get wider instead of taller, it's not like a truck that you can pump it right up and right down. It does lift it because it's taking load off the spring, but not by an enormous amount.